Welcome to the Filmumentaries podcast. My name is Dan Lanigan, and today we are going to be interviewing the person who normally does the interviews, Jamie Benning. Jamie Benning is a friend of mine, and since we've been working together on a number of different projects, he asked me to interview him because personally I think people need to know more about Jamie Benning. He's been doing these wonderful filmumentary documentaries for many years, and he's now doing a series of podcasts about the history of film from the point of view of the people behind the scenes. And that is near and dear to my heart. Jamie, thank you for allowing me to interview you.
Well, thanks for offering to do it. It's going to be interesting to know what questions you're going to ask, and let's see what falls out of my mouth.
That's right. Well, this is going to be good. So, Jamie, tell me about what you are known for in the world of documentaries.
Well, I'm known for a series of what I now call filmumentaries. At the time, I didn't have a name for them, and I decided back in 2006 to make a all-encompassing best documentary I could make on The Empire Strikes Back. It's one of my favorite movies, and I knew that there was material out there. It's kind of a challenge in a way because I didn't know if there was enough material out there to make what I wanted to make. And what I wanted to do was to make a documentary unlike one that had been made before. I wanted to take the film as it exists and then overlay behind the scenes material, be it video, photographs, alternate takes, deleted scenes, as well as different music cues that weren't used or alternate music cues, and put them into this one kind of seamless timeline. So you're watching the movie, but you're watching the movie being made in the order that you expect to see the movie. And what I found is that whenever I saw one of those movie specials on TV or on a DVD, I used to love those moments where they cut from the behind the scenes camera to the actual film, because the difference between, the finished version and how it began always fascinated me. So I love that idea of putting things in context. And also, we've watched these movies, if you're like me, you've watched these movies 100 times and you know what's coming next. Yeah, and you know what's coming next. So I like the idea of jarring the viewer a little bit and say, hang on, I've not seen that before, because it's a different take. Maybe a different line was spoken by the actor, or maybe there's a different music cue in there, as I said, or a deleted scene. And it was another...
I think what you've done is you allow people to look at the movies they love, and you've added something new. In some cases jarring, but in a lot of cases just fascinating. And it's just like, I have a new interest in seeing Empire when watching your documentary with your filmumentary on it.
Yeah, well, that was a lot of the feedback I got, and that was what I was just about to say. And you beat me to it, but it was that kind of feeling that I think a lot of people, at the point I started making these, have become a bit disillusioned with Star Wars. The prequels had just happened. If you're from my generation, it wasn't the Star Wars that we kind of grew up with. And some people had become disillusioned with it. And I had so much feedback from people saying, I've just fallen in love with Star Wars again, thanks to watching my thing. So I made Building Empire. I made Returning to Jedi the following year. And then it took me about another 4 years to do my Star Wars one, Star Wars Begins. And that's when it kind of really took off, and I then put my name out there. Beforehand, I wasn't putting my name out there because I didn't know how it was going to sit with the rights holders and also with the public. But I was getting so much...
Did it get pulled down for copyright issues?
I only ever got one copyright notice, and that was because I uploaded a black and white version of the cantina scene, which the original editor, John Jimpson, had cut. And what happened was that was only available on a CD-ROM from the 90s, and I put it up there from that form. But then it was going to be on the Blu-ray coming out soon, so I was asked to take it down. I then took everything I'd done off YouTube. I had about 4.5 million views of my films on there, and I put them on Vimeo. And then, what I've become known for in recent years is making these shorter form stories. So I'll go and dial in on particular participants in the movies, whether it's a special effects supervisor or an actor. Even in the case of Garrett Hagon, I spoke to him about him being, in the most famous movie ever, and most of his scenes being deleted. And then even more recently than that, April last year during lockdown, I decided, well, everyone's going to be at home. I'm going to do a podcast and I'm going to see how it goes. I didn't really know who my next guest was going to be each time I did it, but it's grown now and I've got momentum going, and I've got 42 episodes in the bag, 39 released at the moment, and
impressive
lining
work.
up for the next few. Yeah, thanks.
Why do you do this? What makes you think you're the guy that should be doing this type of work? I mean, what motivated you initially to sit down and, re-edit, for all intents purposes, Empire Strikes Back? And now you're doing podcasts. Like, what drives you?
What drives me, I think, is it's never really been about me. It's about the people whose stories I'm interested in. And, one of the things a lot of people have said about the podcast is that I just let my guests talk, which is quite refreshing. I think a lot of people are used to podcasts where people are talking over each other and butting in with their guests, trying to show off.
You mean
that
like
they know
I'm going to try and do? No.
Sure, they're like, just like that. But like when a guest says a story and then the host jumps in and wants to say that, yeah, I know that story. Well, maybe I do know that story, but I just want to let them talk. But initially, it was really to make something that I wanted to see. I just thought, how cool is this going to be, just to put all of these things in context with the film and see a different version of that movie that I love. It's not necessarily, well, in fact, at the start, it was really a combination of that and me wanting to learn how to edit. I wanted to learn how to use Final Cut Pro at the time.
Had you edited before?
Yeah, well, my job in TV, I work in live TV. So in 2000, or preceding 2000, I was in a government post, which I can't talk about, otherwise I'd have to kill you and all of the listeners. But I left that and I went to work in TV and film for a short while, or did a TV and film course. And then I got a job with an outside broadcasting company who happened to do contracts for Formula One motor racing, for parliamentary TV coverage, football matches, rugby, cricket, music concerts. So I got a lot of experience there as what we call a live editor, I guess. So playing in inserts into shows, recording things, doing replays, editing highlights, editing packages, kind of on the seat of your pants. So
that's right.
For instance, if there's a Formula One and there's a crash, there's a team of us there that are getting those replays out to you. And trying to make a story of something that maybe you haven't seen before.
In the moment, which is not easy.
Yeah. It's not, I mean, you look at a ball sport like football or soccer, as we say here, everything's pointing at that same thing, the ball, or they're pointing at somebody looking at the ball. But with a motor race, within 2-3 laps, there's a car on every single camera, and you have to make sense of that. And that's what we do. And I coordinate that department. So I have myself and another guy, we share that role. And we have a team of 8 or 10 behind us, and I'm liaising with the director to get that stuff out to her. And I direct a little bit myself as well. So I had edited before, but not in a post-production capacity. The editing that we do, as I said, it's on the fly, it's seat of your pants, and it's done. It better be right because it's going to air. Whereas with post-production, of course, and any project you're doing on your own, you can take as long as you want to take.
That's right.
And, if you're doing post-production for a client, of course, everyone has an opinion. You have 16 different versions of the timeline. But with live TV, there was a certain attraction for me that it's done. It's stressful, but it's like a bubble of stress and you can kind of just get it done and move on. So I just jumped in with Final Cut Pro and thought, I'm not going to, really announce that I'm doing this other than to a group of geeks on a forum called originaltrilogy.com at the time. And what was great is a lot of those people came forward and gave me the footage and just kind of trusted me. Let's go and see if this guy does it. A lot of people start these projects, but not many people finish them.
Yeah. That is so true. And not just finish them, but continue and build momentum with future projects. I think you've handled the subject matter with respect, with a interesting level of questions on the process, and have done it surprisingly well, considering you haven't been working on documentaries for 20 years before you did that. I mean, I think you've done a great job.
Thanks. I mean, I was kind of helped by the fact that the original filmumentaries were in the timeline of the movie, so that's kind of set in stone, and I can build around that. But since then, I've done some of my shorter form stuff. When I interviewed Robert Watts and I interviewed Ivor Powell, 2 producers, British producers that worked on some of the big movies in the 80s and 70s. And that really has been a different discipline, again, trying to take an interview that might be 2 hours long and craft it into like half an hour and make sense of it and really move stuff around on that timeline to make sense of it. Not taking liberties by making up sentences, which you can do in editing these days.
Yes, you can.
And I hear it a lot on things that I watch on Netflix. You can hear a constructed sentence because the intonation is wrong and things like that. So part of, as you mentioned, respect, I give these things respect, and I give the people who I'm interviewing the chance to say what they want to say. And I don't like the idea of manipulating that. When I did my filmumentaries, there were people I would love to have found interviews from, like Marsha Lucas, for instance, but there weren't any out there, and I certainly couldn't get in contact with her at the time. So as much as I wanted to make the kind of best making of, there of course are holes in them because I can't get everybody I want to get. And as I said, I remember with Star Wars Begins, I wanted to release it, and I kept going to release it, and suddenly I'd hear from another actor or another cast member that I hadn't heard from before, and I'd want to get that in. And they were things that were being put out in the public domain. And then in terms of development, I pushed that on with Raiding the Lost Ark after I did Star Wars Begins. I think that took me another 12 months or so. And I did my own interviews in
Raiders
some cases.
is my go-to movie. I mean, Empire I love, but Raiders has kind of driven me in some ways as a collector. I think that's probably the first one I saw. So I wasn't aware of your work up until that point, but fantastic.
Yeah, that was one where there was so much material. I could have made 20 different versions of that because there'd been a couple of documentaries. There'd been the stunts documentary. There'd been bits on the Blu-ray. Well, I don't know. The Blu-ray wasn't out at the time, but the DVDs. I remember the Blu-ray actually ended up having some stuff on there by Laurent Bouzereau, which kind of mimicked the format that I had, which was showing scenes in context, in order, with the facts coming up and things like that. So it's kind of nice to know that my little endeavor, from my bedroom or whatever, had an impact on the industry. And I was getting emails from people at ILM saying, everybody's watching this Star Wars Begins. We've got to pull our socks up for the Blu-ray release. And I've had, so many nice messages from people over the years just saying how much they enjoyed it and how unexpected it was as well.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I've talked to a lot of people in the industry with the work I've done that have worked on all different types of special effects films, big blockbuster films. And, there are people that know about you, that have watched your stuff. You have definitely made an impact.
Well, that's good to know.
But people need to know who you are, the guy, the man behind the filmumentary.
Yeah, well, I think there's a sort of fine line I've found, and I'm still finding, between releasing a kind of polished product in the case of the podcast and those shorter videos, but at the same time trying to communicate it's just me doing it. Because I think there is an assumption sometimes when something sounds professional or looks professional, it's being done by a pro who's being sponsored or anything like that. But I've never made money on my filmmumentary products. Only
that's a key,
since doing the podcast. Huh?
You're doing it for the love of it.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. My podcast, I now get enough money from my lovely patrons on Patreon. That means it covers the cost of the hosting fees, the backup fees, and buying books to do research. But it's my hobby and I'm breaking even. So that's amazing. If I could turn it into an income, that would be fantastic. That would be the dream. But, at least with the podcast, it's my own material. With the other stuff, I was using copyrighted material. So it was always a thing that I said, and I always said it in interviews, whether, I was interviewed by the New York Times at one point and magazines around the world and podcasts. I always make a point of saying I've never made any money on those because I haven't. I mean, I wouldn't, because it's not my material. And I think part of the reason I've never been chased down, I've not had any stormtroopers turn up at my door. I think that's part of the reason that I've always maintained that I haven't made money. I know some people that have made money off of my films. They sell them at fairs and things. There was a few people online. There's people on eBay selling them. So, that does go on.
That's the market we're in.
Yeah, it is.
People are going to do that.
Yeah, it is. But I've always kept my sheet clean on that. And I think, maybe that's why I've never suffered from any repercussions. And then, the podcast, therefore, was kind of the attractive next step for me because, it was, I lost all my work in 2020. I'm a freelancer and I flew back from Australia. The Formula One Grand Prix was cancelled. I landed. on the 17th. It was my daughter's birthday. We went into lockdown, I think, the day after or the day after that. And I thought, I need to do something. I'm one of those people that needs to be busy. And that was why I decided to create the podcast, because, I thought maybe now's the time. I'd thought about it before, but I hadn't really considered how I would do it. Part of the issue is the mechanics of doing a podcast, understanding how to make one, how to get it hosted, how to get it seen, the artwork, all of those things. And did I want to do it with somebody else? And I thought, actually, do you know what? I can rely on myself here. I'm just gonna do this. And my wife has always been really supportive of all the things I've done in the filmumentaries world. So she said, yeah, just do it, get it done, and then you'll know whether you want to continue to do it. And I think episode 3, I spoke to Tim Rose, who worked on Return of the Jedi as puppeteer, and that guest was given, his contact details were given to me by a mate of mine who I work with at Formula One, Dan Dryden. He said to me, Jamie, you've got to do it. This is the time. Go and do it. Here, look, I'll give you Tim's address. He lives just down the half an hour from here, And I spoke to him. And then the following week, I thought, I might try and see if I can get Paul Hirsch, the editor of Star Wars and Empire. And yeah, sure. And he had a book coming out, so that was timed perfectly. And then I kept putting the track in front of the train, There have been points where I've run out of track. And then something comes up, or I'll just, I asked Walter Murch if he would do an interview.
There are limitations to what you can do on your own.
Yeah, there are.
You built up so much momentum that it's kind of coming together much easier for you now, isn't it?
Yeah, and when I asked, Walter Murch, I thought I might ask Walter Murch. Being a huge fan of his work, his book was a bit of a Bible at college, and he said, "Sure, I'm doing a lecture up in North London. Why don't you come up and see me?" And it was the first time I'd gone out since COVID, all masked up and everything on public transport. Had a little chat with him, and very nervous. Yeah, and then the following week we spoke for an hour and 40 minutes on Zoom, and then he wrote to me and said, "Did you get everything you wanted?" And I said, "Oh, I should have talked to you about Return to Oz." And he said, "Well, let's have another hour on Monday," and we just did it again. And we now email each other. If we see something interesting, he drops me an email. And to get somebody that big was not only a buzz for me, but it's worked for the podcast, because now I have guests that go, do I want to do this podcast? Oh, Walter's on there, and Gary Rydstrom's on there, and, it has some big names on there now. So I think it's started to get its own momentum now. But it's just maintaining the challenge.
Yeah, I know, when I did Prop Culture, it was, great and dandy and stressful to do a show for Disney Plus. But for me, the motivation was to be able to talk to the people that have created these things that I adore. And I totally get that from the work you do. As much as it's great to have somebody on the podcast, I would imagine it's even more important to you to be able to have a conversation with these people and just get to know them and get their wisdom.
Yeah, definitely. Like I spoke to the sound designers Mark Mangini and Theo Green recently, who worked on Blade Runner 2049 together, and then Dune for Denis Villeneuve, and talking to them almost as contemporaries. We were talking on a par, and they were kind of asking me about my work, and I was asking them about their work. I cut the bits about me out because, as I said, it's not about me until we've got this episode. Right. But being able to form relationships with these people whose work I admire so much, it humanizes them for a start. And I'm not going to treat people like gods. When I spoke to Walter, he is a film legend, but I'm going to talk to him with respect and reverence, but not go overboard. Nobody wants a sycophantic person around them. So I hope that comes across. At the end of the day,
we're all human.
Yeah, that's it. I think somebody said to me once, the moment you realize that you are no better and no worse than any other person on the planet, it really opens things up. And I thought, you know what, that is absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. Considering that, though, what have been the most special moments for you, involving the podcast when you're sitting down and things that you're hearing from these people? Like, can you share with me a few of the special things that you've gleaned, or just I can't believe I'm here doing this moments?
Yeah, I think it's when you get to those points, for me, it's when you get to those points where it stops being an interview and it becomes a conversation. You could be down the pub, you could be chatting on a train, you just bumped into somebody. So those are the moments that really stand out. And also finding out those stories that I've never heard before, because I could easily go and, in the case of Paul Hirsch, I could easily go and read his book and, prompt him for those anecdotes in the book. But what I want to do is expand on what he's written in there and why he's written it and his relationships with people and, his collaborators. And in the case of Walter, he does go around, he does do these talks and he does write things in he's got a new book coming out next year and he's going to come back on the podcast. He's already said that. That's fantastic. But I think, when somebody's not there just to sell something, I've had a few people who have had books released or whatever, Howard Kazanjian recently. But other people, for me, it's when they just open up and they kind of start telling things that they've not told before. As I said, they've got those kind of, you listen to interviews with a lot of these people and they're ticking off their little anecdotes as they go and they're well crafted. But I like to just go beyond that a little bit and dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I think you can tell from an interviewer's perspective if somebody is telling you a story that you've heard or they've spoken many times, or that it's kind of being crafted in their head at the time and they're connecting with you, because that's the key, right? Is they're connecting with you, and you're, whether or not you're finding out something that nobody's heard before or not. Yeah, from an interviewer's perspective, you got a podcast, you want some of that, but the more genuine the conversation feels, the more real it all is. And that's what I get from your work as well, is it feels very real.
Yeah, one of my good friends, Paddy Tyndall, he's a cameraman that I work with. You've met Paddy. And
I know Paddy. We've done work together. Yeah,
and he said to me, when I initially a friend of mine made a theme tune for my podcast. He's a musician. He lives just down the road here from me, Mike Hewitt Brown. And he made this little music sting for me for the start of my podcast. And Paddy said to me, do you know what? I didn't like that music initially, but now when I hear it, he said, it's like a little Pavlovian response. I know there's going to be a good hour of relaxed chat coming ahead. And he listens to the podcast when he walks his dog or when he's on a flight for a job, So
that's great.
That's what I want it to be.
Reinforcement that you're doing something right.
Yeah, it is, and I do really appreciate feedback from people, and Paddy's been a big supporter, and it's nice to know that I'm making it for people like me, and he is one of those people.
Well, take me through the process. I think it's important. You've already mentioned this, but I think it's important for people to realize that, you're pretty much doing this yourself. And, a lot of people do podcasts themselves, but the level of reach out that you're getting and the level of research that you have to do on top of the work that you did for the filmumentaries, which was yourself as well. Of course, people are supporting you with ideas for footage and things like that. But, I think it comes back to the love of the material and, you want to control the message, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think the love of the material is really important. I find my interest waning if I suddenly get a guest and I think that's not really something for me, But occasionally what's fantastic about it is that I will speak to somebody who I think it's maybe not going to be the best, and then I come out saying, wow, that was a great conversation. I spoke to an author recently called Jay Glennie, who makes these amazing coffee table books. Now, I probably shouldn't describe them as coffee table books because they have a great story in them as well. So he's done one for Deer Hunter, he's done one for Raging Bull, and he's done one for Train Spotting. Now, Deer Hunter is a film that I'm not particularly fond of. I love Raging Bull, I love Train Spotting. And I knew he wanted to talk about the Deer Hunter one. But when we got into the conversation again, it was just kind of flowing. And I do get these prompts from people saying, oh, why don't you interview this person? I think that was one of those. I think one of my followers said, oh, you should speak to Jay Glennie. He makes these amazing books. And I thought at the time, I've had big filmmakers and I've had directors and Oscar-winning sound designers. Do I want to talk to an author? And I thought, actually, I do, because they have their own stories. They have their own creative, narrative. They have their own background. And I'm always interested, like Jay, for instance, he's a guy from Essex. He's just over the river from me here, and he's just like me, but he's doing it in a different form. And I think the more I can communicate that message that, as you said, we're all human, and it just takes a matter of jumping in with 2 feet and giving these things a go. That anyone can kind of do it, really.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. One thing that I think is interesting, and you pointed this out with the Deer Hunter book, is sometimes with material like what you're producing and what I've produced, you can glean things into something that had no interest to you at one point, but because of the expansion of the purpose of the film or the stories of the film, you have a new respect for it and you can change your opinion. And I think ultimately what this type of material that we're doing and really what you're actively doing right now can really open up people's perception of these films in a way that just watching the movie doesn't do. And of course, I think that's why you and I enjoyed watching behind the scenes documentaries when we were younger, because that did that. But this is a whole new world for that.
I just think for me, it's kind of a multi-layered thing. I grew up watching these movies as a kid and fell in love with them. I fell in love with the characters and the story. And in the case of Star Wars and Raiders, with the hardware and everything else in them. And then, when I was, I think 7, my sister bought the Making of Return of the Jedi. It was like a little magazine when we went to see it at the Dominion Theatre here in London. And I bought the storybook, and I remember this transition on the train. I went from looking through the storybook to looking at this making of book going, oh my goodness, people make these movies.
Yeah.
He painted this and she shot that. And it was a real kind of eye-opener, age 7. And then, in making the filmumentaries, my interest was about trying to discover those stories and create a narrative through the film as you're watching the film. And now with the podcast, it's dialing in again. Each of my podcasts has had a connection to Star Wars in some form, whether it's somebody who worked on it or somebody who was inspired by it, or just somebody who saw it and thought, I want to work in movies, and that's what's led them to the position they're in. It isn't a hard and fast Star Wars podcast. It's not just about Star Wars. As I say, I spoke about Raging Bull and Trainspotting recently on one episode, which is yet to come out. But it expands my horizons, it really does. And I miss new material about the films I love. I miss the days of DVDs. There's still obviously some Blu-rays being produced with some great extras on some of these smaller companies that have
but it's more EPK, promoting the film than necessarily diving into the making of.
Yeah, well, that was one of the inspirations. Like in 2004, when the Star Wars trilogy came out on Blu-ray, DVD for the first time, there was a great documentary on there, which was supposedly, just go and make this documentary, tell the story as it is. Lucasfilm kind of saying no holds barred kind of thing, but it wasn't necessarily sanitized, but it did. I did think there was still more story to be told there. And there was some great footage in that documentary, behind the scenes, alternate takes and things like that. And I just thought, yeah, there's another way of telling this story. I've had people over the years saying, oh, you've made nothing. All you've done is taken these clips and plonked them in where they go, But the thing is with these filmumentaries, the feature-length ones, is that you end up with this timeline of the film, which is like 2D almost. And then you find a piece of Mark Hamill talking about the trash compactor. So yeah, you put it by the trash compactor. But that might be a 1977 interview. And then you'll find one from 2007 where he expands on that, and you put those together and suddenly you've got these two perspectives from one single person. You end up with like a 3D puzzle. And as I say, there's probably 100 different versions I could have made of each of these. But the one I decided on was
the difficulty is making the choices, right? And knowing what to keep and what to get rid of.
Well, this, like you've worked on shows and you've been in the edit and you've gone, oh my God, we need to cut this 5 minutes out, or in the case of a movie, I need to cut half an hour out. And sometimes you have to put it in there to know to take it out,
yes.
Which is the thing I did constantly. But what I tried not to do was have multiple versions running at the same time, because for me, that gets a bit dangerous. I then kind of hem myself in a little bit. And because it's just me, I make the decision and I move forward with it.
Well, and then tracking what you put in and taken out and put back in can be difficult. But if it's one person and you have a good memory, I imagine it works easier.
Yeah, well, when I did Star Wars Begins, it was 4 years in the making because I lost At about 80% finished, I lost everything.
What?
A hard drive died. The backup failed. I then had
Oh,
the discs recovered, and I recovered about 30 or 40%. But I was amazed at how much memory I had of what went where. And I did have a couple of low res kind of renders of early versions, just for kind of viewing. And I had to put it all together. And in a way, I think if that hadn't have happened, I may not have finished it. But I was so driven to get it done after I'd lost it all. Because it wasn't until it had all gone that I went, that could have been really good. Okay, let's get behind this and let's do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting how, in that case, a obvious negative, an obvious problem of losing the film had turned around and motivates you to not only finish it but make it better. And interestingly, how the COVID pandemic and everybody shutting down kind of allowed you the freedom to start the podcast, and look where you are now. So obviously there's a lot of bad things that happen in the world, but it's how you take those and manipulate those into something that is positive. And I think you've done a great job with that.
Yeah, well, I as I said, I lost all of my work. I had, a season of Formula One ahead. I had the Olympics. I had, I was going to go to Tokyo for an extended stay out there. Very fortunate to have that kind of work. But when it all disappeared, it made me realize how fragile all of this is. And when I think my first episode was April 2020, and it was an old interview I'd done with Wolf Kahler, who was Colonel Dietrich in Raiders of the Lost Ark. I interviewed him many years, 2012, 2013, up near his house in North London. And I just thought, well, I don't have to do any work necessarily here to get this out. I'll work out, as I said, the infrastructure of how podcasts work. I'll do an introduction, and I'll just see.
I mean, come on, that's work.
It is work, but I didn't have to book a guest and convince them to come on and all of this.
Sure.
And then the second episode, I spoke to my friend who's an actor in the theatre, Giles Torrero, but he's a Star Wars fanatic, and we talk about our love of the films all the time. And then my work came back. I got Formula One kind of worked out how to do our jobs remotely, so I didn't have to travel anymore. I'd travel just to work up the road from here. And I thought, okay, I've got to get back into that now. And I wasn't sure whether I was going to be able to continue doing the podcast, but what the lack of traveling has afforded me is no jet lag for the first time in 20 years, no having to rest either side of a job, no traveling. If I went to Australia for the Grand Prix, as I've done 20 times, I think I've spent over a month on planes going to and from Australia.
You must have some serious frequent flyer miles.
Well, if only we got them, it's, yeah, that's another story. I did get some, but not all. But what that meant was, sometimes when I'd finish a job and we fly home the night of the race, I'd be on the plane asleep or trying to watch a movie or trying to sleep, Now I could just be at home and dig straight into this stuff. And a couple of my colleagues, including a good friend of mine, Tony Ellis, who's a guy that came in kind of below me and I trained him up, and he's now my boss, essentially. He works for Formula One. Very great, very good guy, very driven, very creative.
That's why it's good to treat the people under you, because you never know if they're going to be your boss, right?
But he said to me recently, I think not traveling has been really good for you. He said, you're smashing it. And it was great to hear that from him, because I know he's one of these very driven people that will always do well, and fair play to him for getting to where he's got. And
that's great.
If I can get a compliment of somebody like him, then I'm happy about that.
Yeah, well earned, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. So let's go back in time a little bit. You're doing your filmumentaries. They're on YouTube. They're doing well. You're getting a lot of views, and they're a very professional looking piece. Do you get any interest from anybody who wants to actually work with you from a studio level? Not just you doing it, but somebody who wants to partner with you to develop a film about one of their projects?
Yeah, well, in I think it was 2013, I was working on Formula One, and just before I was due to go to my next race, I was at home and I got a message via Facebook Messenger, which was a bit weird, that said, a particular director wanted to speak to me about my Inside Jaws filmumentary. Now, Inside Jaws,
particular director,
yes, which I will name in a moment, but it was quite fortuitous that he was in Budapest shooting his film, and I was traveling to Budapest the following day. So I just responded saying, forget having a call, maybe we could do something else. I'm in Budapest as from tomorrow. And they said, amazing, we'll set up the meeting. And it turned out it was Brett Ratner who was shooting Hercules. Yeah. So at that time, I knew that he'd made the Rush Hour movies. This is like 2013, as I said. So I went out there. I went out to Budapest, one of my favorite cities in the world. It was actually a few days before I was going to get married to my wife, Becca, and we had a kind of stag do out there as well. I left plenty of room for recovery from the stag do before I had my chat with Brett. And then the following morning, when I was slightly hungover, I'll admit, I got a call saying, would you be able to meet Brett tonight?
Oh, boy.
And they said, if you can get to your hotel by 5 p.m., we'll pick you up and we'll take you on set. And
on set of what?
On set of Hercules, this was.
Right, Hercules.
With Dwayne Johnson and Dwayne Johnson and Ian McShane and a few big names there. Anyway, I kind of wrangled my way out of the circuit on my own. I think a colleague had managed to give me a lift or something back, even though I maybe shouldn't have left that early that day. I got back to the hotel. This Mercedes van picks me up and drives me out of Budapest, and
then they blindfold you and throw you in the back.
Yeah, pretty much. And
you didn't know where this location is.
I thought, what am I doing here? This could be anything. This could be anyone. But
that's right.
I ended up pulling up in this big field in this Mercedes, and the driver kind of turned the engine off, and he was talking in hushed tones. He said, I can see they're just doing a take up there. And as we came over the crest of this hill, there's like 150, 200 guys in all their battle gear with these huge shields, and there's the Rock stood up the front of them with his, like a tiger skin on his head and a loincloth, and they called cut. I got out of the van and I was introduced to, I think, the AD, and then they saw that Brett was finished with that scene, or for that particular take, and they said, Brett, Jamie's here. And he turned around, he just gave me this big hug, and he said, everybody, this is Jamie, who made that amazing Jaws documentary I've been telling you about. And everyone was like, hey Jamie, blah, blah, blah. And
that's awesome.
He said, oh man, sit here and you can sit in my chair. And I sat on his chair, and there were kind of video monitors in front of me, and they went for about another 4 or 5 takes of this scene. And it was the scene, the kind of Braveheart scene where he's like saying, we were born for this is our destiny, and rallying the troops. And all the troops had to hit their staffs on the ground at the same time and roar kind of thing. And they did a bunch of takes. Every take, Dwayne absolutely nailed, like put 100% into it. Having seen on the way through to the set, I saw his 3 trailers with his, workout gear and everything. And they were talking about how he has to eat so much and work out so much. And then they introduced me to him, and I shook his hand, and, all I can remember is just thinking, this guy's legs are bigger than me, it's just like a tower. And then I was introduced to Ian McShane. It was surreal. And I was still slightly hungover as well. So the whole thing was surreal. My voice had gone a little bit. Yeah, my voice was a bit husky, and I was introduced to Ian McShane, who I've known on British TV since I was a kid, Oh
God, I love his work.
And then Brett said to me, come follow me, we're going to go and plan tomorrow's shot. So we walked down this hill, and the next scene was these troops coming out of the forest there, and I'm just kind of stood there just going, what the heck, So the next thing, they wrap for the day, we jump in the car, and there's like a 50-minute journey back to Budapest, and he says, Brett is like talking at 1,000,000 miles an hour. His assistant is getting to sign
you're with
stuff.
Brett in the car.
I'm with him in the car, in this big Mercedes van. His assistant is opposite him saying, Brett, you need to sign this. And, you need to call your grandpa. So he's talking to me, signing stuff, and talking to his grandpa on Skype, who had just had a stroke. Brett was saying to me that, I talk really fast, so pay attention. Are you just a Lucas and Spielberg geek, or do you like other films? Tell me the films you like. Give me your top 10. So I'm just giving him this list, and I happened to mention Chinatown, and he went, yes, stop, Chinatown. Let's do a documentary on Chinatown. I know Roman, I know Jack, I know, the producer, and I'm just sitting there, and he said, I want to make books with you, I want to make documentaries with you. I'm starting up a new thing called Rat Pack Features and Rat Pack Documentaries and Rat Pack Books. And what happened is he dropped me off at my hotel, and he said, right, tomorrow I want an email from you with your top 10 and like a synopsis from each, what you think the story is and why you think it's important, right? So I stayed up.
What a homework
assignment. I stayed up. Yeah. I bear in mind I had the race, I think, the next day, early start, lots of other sessions to do. So I stayed up very late writing all these synopses and sent it off to him. And he said, cool, I'm going to take a look at this and we'll speak on Tuesday. So I flew back Sunday night. Monday, I'm just, staring at my phone. Tuesday, I'm staring at my phone. And he ended up putting me in touch with a behind-the-scenes director and producer in LA, and we ended up chatting. And then what happened was timing was against me. He got that deal with Warner Brothers to produce their next kind of 50 movies or whatever it was through Rat Pack and Legendary, I think it was at the time. So he went from this kind of also ran director to kind of a movie mogul in a way overnight, So I think their first two movies were the Lego Movie and something else. And it was him and James Packer, the Australian billionaire. And they made a huge amount of money on those films. And then, of course, since then, he's been through a lot of controversy about his about goings on. So maybe it was for the best in the long run, but it was my first kind of insight into I've had an impact on the industry. Wow, There's people actually watching this. Oh God, I forgot to tell you the best bit. The best bit, we're in the car, and he said, "Has Stephen seen your Jaws documentary?" I said, and he looked at me and he went, "Spielberg." I said, "I don't know, Brett. I'm not in the industry, And he said, call Stephen. He said to his assistant, call Stephen.
What?
So she goes, you want me to call Stephen? And she goes, okay. So she starts going through this phone. She dials this number. Hi, Stephen there, please. And I'm thinking, holy fuck, he's going to hand me the phone. So he grabs the phone off his assistant. He goes, hi, Steve. And then he's mouthing to her, wrong Stephen. And it was Steven Soderbergh. So he goes, I'll talk to you. Still not a bad person to talk, but then he goes, yeah, I'll speak to you later, man. No worries. Bye. And hangs up. And then he's on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, So anyway, that all kind of folded because of this new deal he had. And then some years later, a woman got in contact with him who ran a company called Fanthropology. Now this company worked very closely with a lot of the studios, particularly with Fox at the time and a little bit with Disney. And they create these reports. They do analysis on the market and where the market's going and where it's been and viewing figures and everything else. And they make these huge reports and they give them to the studios. And it could be about the horror genre. It could be about the superhero bubbles about to burst kind of thing. And
they've been saying that
her name was
years.
Chris. Yeah, and Chris said to me, she said, I think I've got an in here at Fox, and I think we could find you a way to talk to one of the execs about doing a filmumentary in the style of a filmumentary for Fox. What would your top films be? And I'm thinking, my goodness, there's Alien, there's Planet of the Apes, I ended up going through this whole process, making like a pitch book, like the big, not quite as big as the Dune book, but it was getting there. I had an artist friend of mine do storyboards, and we did this big book, and we handed that in. I ended up having multiple meetings with them online. We got a budget in place. We actually had Stacey Snider, who was the executive at Fox at the time. She was running Fox. She gave it the green light. She said, I like what this guy's done. I think we could work well with him. Let's get on with this. So I got the email. It's still somewhere in my Gmail.
Oh, that must have felt amazing.
Yeah, it did. And I thought, wow, maybe this time it's going to happen. And this was, a couple of years. This was 2015. So this is a couple of years after the Brett Ratner stuff. So we ended up doing a budget that was approved. And literally within, I think, like 2 days before we were signing contracts and everything, I landed in Singapore working on the Grand Prix, and I got a text message from the exec. And she said, I'm so sorry, Jamie, I'm leaving. I'm going to Microsoft. And if you know anything about execs in
Yes,
Hollywood,
yeah.
the next one
You have an
will not
exec
pick up
that's
the project.
championing. You have an exec that's championing something. Someone else comes in. You're no longer very unlikely going to get your project moving forward because they want to bring their own stuff in.
That's it. And they don't want to be, hanging off the coattails of a previous exec. They want to make their own stamp. So the next exec was not interested, didn't really like sci-fi, I think, maybe, I don't know. It was a real shame because we got close to getting licensing for the music and for the film and for Roddy McDowall's 8mm footage. And we'd gone to archives and dug out stuff. We got really far down the road with it. So that was kind of a hard hit. So then I think that's when I didn't want to make another filmumentary in the style of Building Empire, Return to Jedi, and Raiding Lost Ark and Inside Jaws, because I thought they act as a sort of online CV in a way. This is what I'm capable of doing on my own. And I think, that's what attracted both Warner Brothers through Brett and Fox, that, oh wow,
Right.
He does this on his own. What could he do if he got the resources?
That's right.
And got in the archives.
I thought that myself.
Yeah, well, I kind of was excited at the idea of being able to, but what I did learn, of course, is there is no Fox archive, there is no Warner's archive. I mean, it's spread throughout the galaxy, and the rights for things are a problem. I mean, there was one time where they said you can't use the music from Planet of the Apes, but you can use a non-union recorded version that we did 6 weeks after. It's like, I'm not going to make the best making of this film for the fans and use the music that isn't actually the score. But so you find out all these things and all these walls you hit and all these hurdles you have to jump over. So I was kind of inspired.
They're real.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was kind of inspired.
My work at Disney, I had heard all these stories, but when we worked on Prop Culture, it is very complicated getting licensing to the point where you can actually air things when you're using other people's stuff. So I can only imagine, as an outside producer like yourself, how difficult that would be. But it still sounded like it was, a good opportunity. And hey, maybe this could happen.
Yeah, it was. And, I remember when I met the Fox exec in London, we went in a posh hotel on the river there, and she came down and she was saying she was so excited about it. She said, I just want to give you a hug because I know we're going to have a long relationship doing this. I want Fox to be the home of sci-fi, and I want you with us all the way. We've got a new Alien coming. It was a bunch of sci-fi movies.
Right.
And it was like, wow, this could happen. But when all of that collapsed, I took a bit of time out. I think the next thing I did was when I interviewed Dave Barkley, the puppeteer who worked on Yoda and worked on a bunch of the Muppet movies and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And I'd met Dave at a film fair, and he just seemed like a nice guy. And I thought, look, I'm just going to organise this. And then I thought, you know what? Rather than just interview him for audio, I'm going to arrange to see if I can shoot it somewhere interesting. And at that time, Madame Tussauds here in London were having a Star Wars exhibition. There was quite an accurate-looking Yoda that they had there.
Right.
And I asked them, and they said, yeah, great, we'll have you come up. So they didn't sponsor it. I didn't get any money for it again. I just got time to spend there.
For them to do it?
No. They just let me go up there and shoot it because, it helps.
And this was after
ultimately,
hours?
it helps. This was after hours, yeah. Initially, it was as few people were coming through, but then, it was after hours.
They
Dave's a friend of...
for like having security or anything like that?
No, because it was me and it was Paddy and it was my friend Tony, who I mentioned earlier. He was just there.
That's great.
We just got in and got out in an hour and a half kind of thing. And that kind of, again, elevated it a bit for me because I'd done these other interviews before where I'd kind of painted the audio with pictures, with footage, with stills and things. But I'd never made something on my own. So with Dave, I got a friend to make some augmented graphics so that when he's talking and using his hand for how the puppet worked, we did like an outline of Yoda. And then when he's talking about how he was under the floor and, Frank Oz was manipulating this and there was a guy doing the ears and he was doing the eyes.
Yeah, it's a very illustrative format to add to the interview that worked really well. Yeah.
Yeah, I was really pleased with that one. And I think that's when you and Jason kind of saw, it's that guy that did those things a few years ago. He's doing some more stuff. And that's when you got in touch with me via my website. I remember that because it was like, I'm trying to get hold of you. Can we have a chat? And it was like, okay, who's this?
Who's it? Who are these bozos? We're
And
just
then,
two
you know,
schmoes
what was
that have got a
fantastic.
show for Disney Plus. We're trying to figure it out as we go.
So I'm thinking, you know, it collapsed with Warner, it collapsed with Fox. Maybe this could be the one, you know. So,
Yeah,
and what was great about that is you and Jason are like me. You know, you're doing
yeah,
it because you love it. Obviously, you want to make a living out of it as well. But
right. Yeah, we
that
love
that
it.
love for it is the primary thing. And to work on a show like Prop Culture was a great buzz. I mean, you know, I was just you were running things by me. What do you think of this? How did you get in contact with this guy? Do you, you know?
Yeah, so
I
yeah,
put you in
so
contact with
so
people.
Jamie used to give, just for the audience perspective,
Mm.
we brought you in because you had this great repertoire of, on your own, getting all this great material from all these old documentaries, and then your personal aesthetic of how you handled the material was very much the way we think. So it was not just your experience in tracking down these old documentaries and this footage, but really it was your filmmaking aesthetic that we wanted you as a consultant and to give us some help. And that's, you did a lot of work of digging up footage out in the UK, and then you came over and spent some time with us here in LA as well, and it was great.
Yeah,
Honestly,
well, I was.
I wish we could have had you as a full-on producer. It just wasn't in the cards. But
Yeah. It was.
Prop Culture
It
season
was.
2 ever happens, we're going to change that.
I'll come over for a few months.
That's
Yeah, I
right.
was quite lucky in that I was working on another job, Formula E, which is electric car racing, and I think my contract with you guys had kind of finished after a couple of months there. And I thought, I'm in Mexico City. LA is not actually that far away. Maybe I should fly up there and just see the guys. And then I spoke to my director, a guy called Westbury Gillett, great name. He said, just go up there, just do it. So I think I contacted a few of you guys and I said, look, I'm not far away. I'm happy to pop up. And, very graciously, the guys at Disney said, look, yeah, we'll put you up in a hotel and we'll get you a flight back. And I spent like a week up there coming into the office with you guys each day. And it was great again to see that process. And like we just said, a few moments ago, seeing how the goalposts were changing every day on you guys, and you were doing one on this subject, and suddenly, no, that can't be done. We've got to do this, and just seeing you guys being able to adapt to those changes was a big lesson for me as well, because
That's just
I
part
work
of the
in live
process.
TV. Yeah, and I work in live TV, as I said, and we have to change things on the seat of our pants at the very last minute. But you guys, I know how far you've gone down some roads and how you were taken from not going further down that path. But what came out at the end made it worth it, because it was a great show.
Yeah, we had episodes that we were going to do that completely I can that had a lot of connections to some of your previous work.
Yeah.
Star Wars and Raiders, but it just wasn't in the cards for us ultimately. But it's certainly, we've got material, which, hopefully that we'll get a chance to use it sometime, right?
Yeah, hopefully.
So where do you see yourself in 5 years with this material? But best case scenario, what are your goals? Where do you want to take this?
I was asked this question actually when I was dealing with the Fox and the Fanthropology people, and they kind of said, let's write a 5-year plan, let's write a 10-year plan. And I'd never really looked that far ahead before, but having come out the other side of that and then working with you guys and then doing the podcast, my aim at the moment is to just get my podcast to as many ears as possible. And, I had an aim the other week that I wanted to get in the top 5, and I got in the top 3 film history podcast in the UK. Now, this is somebody who's been doing this for less than a year and a half, so I was pretty pleased with that achievement. What I'd love to do is come up with another series that's a bit more focused in terms of a podcast, come up with something that has its own kind of remit, has its own niche. Because at the moment, it's just this Jamie guy calling up people he admires in the film industry and having a chat with them. But what's the focus? There's no narrative essentially involved in it. So what I'd love to do is go away and do maybe like a 12 episode run, get it all done, get it all in the bag, craft it into something. So it'd be more of a documentary format than a conversational format, and then release that over a period of weeks, just to show and challenge myself really, and show myself that I could do that is one of the aims. But also, I think, if you do want a successful podcast, it has to have a remit. It has to have a focus. Some of the most successful ones in the UK right now are things like where they look at one film and they analyze it minute by minute, or some of the great stuff that's on BBC Sounds at the moment. Well, there's a great one at the moment that John Ronson's doing, a journalist, and he wrote The Men Who Stare at Goats, and he's written some fantastic books. He's looking at the culture wars at the moment and how the culture wars started, and he's looking at how things were affected in America with the AIDS pandemic, and then looking at kind of worries about devil worshipping in the 80s amongst churchgoers, and just a fascinating series because it's referencing history, but it's so up to date in terms of what we're going through now with the culture wars online and publicly shaming and all that stuff.
That's
I mean,
right.
John is a very talented, journalist, and he's done very well for himself, but his podcast has a tight enough remit to draw you in, but it's loose enough to allow completely different subject matters to be connected by this one idea, this one thread. So I like that idea. But the big dream really has been for many years is I'd love to do the behind the scenes stuff on movies, but I know the reality of that is probably not what I imagined, it was 10, 15 years ago, because I know it's EPKs and you have to fulfill this part of the contract. You have to speak to this person. They have to say this thing, and you can only show this footage or this footage or this footage. I think the days of a kind of warts and all behind the scenes documentary, like, Lost in La Mancha, or the Werner Herzog's Burden of Dreams, or, one of these. Okay. Yeah. And the Apocalypse Now one, Hearts of Darkness, I think, and The Shining, even the Shining documentary, the short one, I think those gave insights beyond the kind of publicity machine, and that's what really interests me. But who knows, that might come true one day. I had another thing with Universal last year where they kind of wanted to invite me to have a meeting and give my ideas, but it just seemed they just wanted my ideas to take and go away.
And somebody else do.
Yeah,
that happens occasionally. Yeah. But the dream really is to be able to do things that interest me, things that I'm driven to do, that motivate me, and if I can make a living out of it, then that's a bonus. It's not the be all and end all for me. Making the money from it is not the be all and end all. It's a lucky side effect. So you just want to continue doing extension of what you're doing now, something that, to me, it feels like diving into this this film world that we all love from a respectful way to learn about it and to make something people want to see.
Yeah, and I each time I've wanted to increase the production value of it, whether it was going from using material that's in the public domain to then doing my own interviews for the filmumentaries, to then, like with Jaws, that was a challenge. Like, I thought, there's been like 5 documentaries on Jaws. Is there another story that can be told? And luckily I was able to get hold of some material of a lot of people from Martha's Vineyard being interviewed, footage that was never, or audio that I ended up using that was never used previously. And to tell that story from that perspective was just a new twist in a way. And now that I've done the Ivor Powell and the Dave Barkley and the Robert Watts mini documentaries, I'd love to get into doing a feature length documentary. I don't know what the subject would be. I have ideas, of course, but obviously you need a buyer for those things. If you're going to go down that road, there needs to be money to help you make it, not let alone at the other end, turning a profit. But I think with the podcast, I've now kind of proved to myself that I can do that. I mean, I'm a shy person, but I've got to the point now where I can talk to somebody like Walter Murch and I can chat with him for a couple of hours about his work and, create a friendship, a relationship. Maybe we're not friends, but we're acquaintances. So that's kind of taught me that I can go out there and I can do this stuff. And, if the COVID situation improves...
it's all about building confidence in the work you're doing, and I think you should be confident about the work you've been doing because it is worthwhile.
Thanks. I mean, one of the things that really helped me with that was when I got asked to become a trainer for one of my clients, and they said, I think you could train people how to use this editing equipment, this hardware and software. They're the kind of industry leader in replay and fast turnaround editing, live editing. And that was like 2007. And I kind of thought, why are they picking me? I mean, I'm just the sort of quiet guy in the corner that keeps his head down. But then I was training 5 people. And then, last year I ended up doing an online like seminar about what I do to 200 odd people, because I'm rolling stuff to people on Formula One that goes to 500 million people.
So what's the big deal, right?
I don't think about it. It's just I do it because I want to do a good job, right? So, and that's what it comes down to ultimately. And I think the next step for me is to continue to develop these relationships, continue to develop the concepts, and continue to make stuff that I want to hear. I don't want to hear podcasts with people falling over each other for their guest, or people, kind of arguing about stuff just because they want to spout their opinion. I think discussion is an important part of podcasting. I think it's great to have different perspectives, but I'm not a great fan of podcasts that kind of are just there to piss you off as a listener.
Yeah,
I want people to respect, and respect is a big part of it for me, as we said before. So I'll continue to push. I'll continue to develop, hopefully, and continue to enjoy it. As soon as I'm not enjoying it, then I won't do it anymore. But, I've got this issue as well that I have a job. I have a regular job. I'm a freelancer, but I have a regular contracts with companies.
It stinks that you got to make money to live,
Yeah.
But really,
I mean, I do love
it's a reality of the world we're in.
It is. It is. But I love my job. I've worked for Formula One for 20 years. I worked for EVS, who I trained for 14 years. I've worked on Formula E. I worked for Sky and ITV and all the big channels here. What I have to be careful about, of course, is when I divert my resources into making something that isn't making me money, but looks like it is, that clients will go, oh, Jamie's not available. He's off doing that thing. So
that's right.
I have to keep one foot in my regular camp whilst, putting a toe into these new endeavors. But I enjoy it. I love doing it. So,
well, I think you do a great job. I look forward to future projects and working together. I always enjoy chatting with you. Some of these stories today I've heard before, but I've learned some new stuff. You're a very interesting guy, Jamie. Very modest, more modest than you should be, but that's what I love about you. And I wish you the best success. Thanks for allowing me to help you tell your story.
Thanks, Dan. I know, I really appreciate it. It's been fun chatting, and it's good to be reminded of some of these things as well, in terms of bolstering my confidence to move on to the next thing. So yeah,
you can do it, man. You can do it. You're as talented as anybody doing this kind of stuff. So just remember that. Man.
Thank you. And I'm sure we're going to work together. We're going to make it happen at some point.
Absolutely. All right. Well, signing off for the Filmumentary podcast. Typically, Jamie Benning being the host. It's Dan Lanigan. Hopefully, you guys check this out. Check other podcasts out. His Filmumentaries, his short films, his short docu-films. And hey, this guy, hook up if you like what he's doing. Put some money in that Patreon account. It'll just help more of these cool things be made.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
See you later.